We are cutting into the weeds here, folks. Because when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens, there are a number of topics that we can dive into. We can talk about the prospects. We can talk about some of the commentary made by guys like David Reinbacher and Cayden Primo following the Laval Rockets' elimination in the Calder Cup Playoffs. We can talk about the speculation as to whether or not Lane Hutson is going to get an extraordinary contract extension come July 1st. We can talk about whom it is the Canadiens could draft or whom it is they could be interested in. But in this video, I wanted to respond to an article published on Montreal Hockey Now by Marc Dumont 3 days ago on June 3rd. Canadiens trade talk, evaluating the Jason Robertson trade rumors. This is par for the course, is it not? Talking about one of the top trade targets, a guy who is supposedly, apparently, maybe, potentially on the market, and diving into whether or not the Montreal Canadiens could actually use the services of this guy. Now, just to get it out of the way, yeah, of course, you know from the title, thumbnail, the article, we're talking about J-Rob. Jason Robertson of the Dallas Stars, who had an 80-point season in 82 games played this most recently completed campaign. He is 2 years removed from being a 109-point player. He has been a point per game pretty much every other season he has been in the NHL, even though you can say that he hasn't necessarily been his best as of late. This is especially true when you look at the fact that he only had 6 points in 11 games in the playoffs this year for Dallas. Nevertheless, Jason Robertson, as a player with a contract coming to an end in 2026, is making $7.75 million a year, and he will be eligible to sign an extension come July 1st. 25 years old, 6'3", 201, he's a big winger, and because Mikko Rantanen was brought into Dallas, and the overall cap crunch situation that this team is going through, it's why we are seeing names like Jason Robertson and potentially Mason Marchment, or maybe that should have been the other way around, Mason Marchment and potentially Robertson on the block. This is dived into and more by Marc Dumont on his article, which will be linked in the description if you want to go out there and read yourself. Dumont, of course, writing on Montreal Hockey Now, who is a primary Montreal beat writer, writes this piece from the perspective of the Montreal Canadiens. And he says here that even though Robertson is not a center, we gotta make one thing clear. He is an elite player who is just 25 years old, making him an interesting trade target for the offense-starved Montreal Canadiens. It's not just a matter of producing more than a point per game over the course of his 5 full seasons in the NHL, though that is clearly a plus. Robertson's underlying numbers are fantastic, to the point that it's a little shocking he would seriously be included in any trade talk. Although, this is where the article dives into the circumstances and the status quo of the bridge deal and how it seems to have bitten Dallas in the behind to have not fully committed as many years as possible to J-Rob back when he was coming off of his entry-level contract. And so now, the fact that they're in their own cap crunch, and because J-Rob is being included in these discussions, it makes things very interesting for teams that could be inquiring the Stars about this player. This is not a matter of sending Dallas spare parts for a lightly used Lamborghini, Dumont writes. Forget the type of offer that would involve Michael Ryder, Yaroslav Halak, and a second-round pick. Oops, I mean a 2025 first-round pick, and some other asset Habs fans wouldn't mind losing. If Montreal wants to convince Dallas to move Robertson, they'd have to include some of their best players, not to mention enough picks to compensate for the loss of a star player. And yes, that goes without saying. I know a lot of Montreal Canadiens fans like to hypothesize trades and think about what it would cost to get star players from opposing teams, and I will admit, Habs fans, we can be guilty of just totally being out to lunch with our trade ideas. Oh, well, you take this crappy roster player and this prospect that has no NHL potential and a fourth for a superstar first-round pick caliber guy? Yeah, it's probably not good to think about it like that, but that has been maybe one of the main themes we have seen out of Canadian cheering NHL franchise fans over the past few years. And so thinking about a Jason Robertson trade, it's a lot more difficult. Dumont writes in the article that he doesn't really think he wants to give a trade idea or a trade proposal because he tends to underrate Canadiens players and prospects, but this is how you should probably look at it. Would the Montreal Canadiens trade a player who cracked the 100-point mark just a couple of years into his NHL career for an offer that only amounts to the sum of the parts once a few mediocre pieces are included? Absolutely not. That doesn't mean the Habs can't perform due diligence, one of their clear strengths, but if they want to take a ride in the riverboat, they'll have to go down to the river. And so essentially what this article says, the conclusion here by Dumont is that Jason Robertson would be hella expensive. And that's fine. And of course, nobody's going to disagree with that, but I do think there are potentially enough pieces here that could move the needle enough to have the Dallas Stars at the very least thinking about it. No, I think it'd be easy to say, oh yeah, just trade Patrik Laine and Michael H and a first-round pick for Jason Robertson, and you got it. But think about it from Dallas's point of view. You're probably potentially going to trade Jason Robertson because you don't have enough money to keep around all the guys that you got, and you might be in a situation where you have to choose Rantanen over Robertson. The entire issue is that Robertson's contract is going to expire and that he's going to get a big payday. You're not going to trade this guy for Patrik Laine, for example, who's making more money than Robertson is right now, and who also has a contract that's expiring soon. It is a total loss of a trade. You just get worse. Laine is not as good as Jason Robertson, although he is potentially a better goal scorer. I think on any given night, there's a coin flip, head or tails chance that he can be better, but Laine is not going to cut it. There needs to be at the very least one super solid NHL caliber piece. And unfortunately, I think the pieces that Dallas would consider fulfilling that threshold, they need to get a roster player back, of course. The minimum caliber of player that they would get in return that they'd be okay with getting, I don't think the Canadiens would be willing to trade that away. There isn't a Marty Necas-like asset in Montreal that is already in a precarious predicament and has a high chance of getting traded. Nobody's thinking about Demidov, Caulfield, or Slafkovsky as a guy to get on the move. In fact, I don't even know if Yuri Slafkovsky would move the needle enough for Dallas. Yes, the potential is there, the playstyle is there, but the thing is, if you're thinking about Slafkovsky, best case scenario in his NHL career, he's a Mikko Rantanen 2.0. So would the Dallas Stars really be interested in getting, oh yeah, let's get Rantanen, and then we'll get Rantanen Light, who's maybe a 60, 70, 80 point version of Rantanen, because Rantanen's a 100 point caliber guy. It just feels kind of redundant there. So I do question whether or not the Montreal Canadiens would be able to pull this off, but the idea is intriguing, and if you were to fully find a way to get Jason Robertson onto this Habs team, screw the second-line center. You can toss Jake Evans or Christian Dvorak or anybody in there, and as long as you've got Robo and Demidov on the wings, you're probably going to be fine. So, with all that in mind, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the idea of the Montreal Canadiens potentially acquiring Jason Robertson of the Dallas Stars? Do you think it's actually possible? Do you think there is a realistic avenue for this to transpire? What kind of assets do you think the Montreal Canadiens would need to give up in some sort of a move like this? There are enough doubts to make this seem like a totally out-of-whack, crazy, nonsensical idea. And I understand that. I agree with that to an extent. But nonsensical things can still have some conversations behind them, and it's why I wanted to go out there and take a stab at this idea myself here. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Canadiens and Jason Robertson? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.